No one ever tells you how quietly a heart can break. There was no thunder, no dramatic music, no sharp crack like they show in movies. It just slipped apart one morning, while she stirred sugar into her coffee like nothing was wrong. Her back was to me, the soft hum of the kettle still echoing in the kitchen. She looked peaceful, ordinary, and in that exact ordinariness something inside me crumbled. I had been married to Ha-un for 7 years. To the world, we were the golden couple, college sweethearts turned life partners. People often said we looked like a perfect match. She was elegant, intelligent, kind in the way people wrote poems about. I was quieter, the dependable type, never the loudest in the room, but always there, like the solid frame of a house holding everything together. She used to hold my hand in public. She used to laugh at my dumbest jokes. There was a time she couldn't sleep unless her feet touched mine under the blanket. But somewhere along the way, silence replaced her laughter. Her gaze became distant, like she was watching a life she no longer belonged to. I noticed, of course, I'm not blind. But when someone you love begins to fade, you don't shout, you don't demand, you wait, you hope, you bleed quietly. The first sign wasn't a lipstick stain or a strange number on her phone. It was the absence of small things, the forgotten kiss before leaving for work, the way she never asked if I'd eaten. I told myself she was tired, that maybe work was hard, that maybe she was just going through something she didn't want to talk about. Until I found the necklace. It was hidden in the bottom drawer of her vanity. A gold chain with a tiny sapphire pendant. I'd never seen it before. I knew every piece. Herve jewelry she owned, I'd bought most of them. But this one, this was different. Expensive, delicate. And tucked beneath it was a handwritten note, folded in half like a secret. It read, "For every time I can't say it aloud." J. That's when the first crack became a fracture. I didn't confront her. Not then. I wasn't ready to hear the lie, or worse, the truth. Instead, I placed it back exactly how I found it, closed the drawer, smiled when she came into the room. I watched her brush her hair, humming a song under her breath like everything was fine, and maybe for her it was. But for me, the world had shifted. I began to notice more. The late nights at the office, the sudden obsession with her phone, the way she smiled into the screen when she thought I wasn't looking. I never followed her. I never checked her messages. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was fear, because deep down I already knew. It wasn't until our anniversary dinner that things began to truly unravel. She wore a red dress I'd never seen before. Her makeup was heavier than usual. Her perfume was new, intoxicating but unfamiliar, like a scent chosen to impress someone else. She barely touched her food. Her phone buzzed 3 times during the meal. Each time she silenced it with a guilty glance. I looked at her and thought, is this still the woman I married? She raised her glass and said, "To us." I clinked mine against hers and replied, "To honesty." She blinked just once and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. A shadow, a fracture of guilt. Later that night she fell asleep quickly, or pretended to. I sat beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breath. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to ask the questions that were clawing inside my chest. But instead, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to the darkness, "Why? Hyun, why couldn't you just tell me?" The days that followed were quiet. She acted as if everything was normal. But I began pulling away slowly. I no longer asked about her day. I stopped bringing home her favorite pastries. I began leaving the house earlier, coming home later. If she noticed, she didn't say. Until one morning, as I packed for a short business trip, she stood in the doorway and asked, "Are we okay?" It was the first time in months she'd looked me in the eye, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the drawer open, wave the necklace in her face, and demand an explanation. But instead I just said, "Yeah, we're fine." Because the truth is, I wasn't ready, not yet. Not to fight, not to forgive, not even to walk away. I needed time. I needed space. I needed to become someone who didn't break at the sight of a sapphire necklace and a note signed by someone named Jay. But that moment, that one question from her, planted a seed. Maybe she knew I knew. Maybe guilt was finally catching up to her. Or maybe, just maybe, she was preparing her own story, and mine was just beginning. 3 days after that, I returned from the short business trip. It was drizzling lightly, the scent of damp earth lingering on the path leading to the house. I opened the door. Every step felt like I was walking through a house I no longer recognized. Ha-Yun was in the kitchen. She heard me come in, but she didn't run to greet me like she used to. There was no sparkle in her eyes, no joyful, "You're home." Just a distant, casual question. "Have you eaten?" I replied. "Not yet. Did you cook something?" There's still some soup in the pot, and that was it. Dinner had become a ritual. The things that once felt like love now resembled polite formalities. She still sat across from me, turning her glass slowly, her eyes wandering elsewhere. Every time I tried to meet her gaze, she looked away, as if afraid I might see through something she could no longer hide. I didn't ask her about. I didn't mention the necklace. I just watched. I heard her laugh while on the phone as I stepped into the bathroom. Her kind of laughter that no longer belonged to me. Hadn't for months. I saw her fixing her hair in the mirror when a message popped up at 10 p.m. I could feel it, that her embrace had lost its warmth. One Saturday afternoon, we had dinner at her mother's house. Her mother had always liked me. She used to say, "Out of all the men chasing after Ha-Yun, only you ever gave her peace." The meal went on normally until her mom asked, "So when are you two planning for another child?" Hubin put down her chopsticks and gave a nervous smile. "Not any time soon, Mom. We're both too busy." I glanced at her hand. The wedding ring was gone. I smiled and joked. Or maybe, she's planning for someone else's kid and I'm the last to know. Ha-Yun flinched. Her mother burst into laughter, thinking it was just a harmless joke. But I saw it. That fleeting tremble in Ha-Yun's smile. The flash of fear in her eyes. That night back home she went straight to bed. I stayed out on the balcony, lit a cigarette for the first time in years. The flame flickered in the cold wind. I remembered the nights she'd sit out here with me. Her head on my shoulder, fingers laced through mine. Where had it all gone? When did love disappear? I entered the room to find her lying with her back to me. I said nothing. But just as I was about to turn off the light, she spoke, softly. "Are you mad at me?" I froze. My heart tightened. "Mad? About what?" I asked. "About me. Not being the same wife I used to be." I turned to look at her. Just her back and her hair spread across the pillow. I answered, "You've always been a good wife, just not my wife anymore." She sat up, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." I kept my voice calm. "How long have you been in love with him?" She stayed silent. Then slowly she lowered her head. "I don't know. It just happened. I felt alone. I felt lost. And he made me feel seen." I gave a bitter smile. "And I wasn't alone?" She had no reply. I didn't yell. I didn't demand his name. I didn't accuse her. I just asked one final question. "So, what do you want to do with this marriage?" She bowed her head again, as if the answer was already obvious but too painful to say out loud. "I think we need time." I nodded. "All right, I'll give you time. But don't expect me to be the man who waits forever." That night, neither of us slept. We lay with our backs to each other, the wide bed now a cold no-man's land. Unspoken words hung thick in the air, like one wrong breath could shatter everything. The next morning she made breakfast. I didn't eat. I put on my suit, picked up my briefcase, and just before I walked out the door I said, "I'm going away for a while." "Where?" she asked. "To the place you forgot who I was." I closed the door behind me, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I walked out without feeling like I'd left something worth returning to, because that love of mine was no longer home. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove. No destination. As if I was running from the pieces of myself scattered through every room of that house. 1 week passed, then 2. I rented a small cabin near the southern coast. Salt. In the wind, the air crisp and waves crashing against rock each night like lullabies for the broken-hearted. I spent most of my days reading, journaling, and staring at the sea. During 7 years of marriage to Ha-Yun, I'd never had time to look inward. I loved her so deeply that I forgot to love myself. Every morning I made coffee, for one. Every evening I cooked a simple meal, for one. And slowly, I didn't feel lonely anymore. I started writing again, something I once loved in college but had abandoned to make room for work and marriage. The words poured out like blood from an old wound, painful but strangely liberating. I wrote about betrayal, about shattered trust, about how a man learns to stand again when the woman he trusted most becomes the one who breaks him silently. Posted a few excerpts on an anonymous forum. People read them. They reached out with stories of their own, and I realized pain didn't need to be hidden. It was proof that I'd loved, genuinely. 3 months later, I returned to Seoul. I didn't go home, I went to the office. It was the same building where I used to be just another employee. But this time, I wasn't the same man. During my time, away I had quietly built a small company. Leveraging old connections and a few trusted friends, I developed a side project. Unexpectedly, it landed a service contract with none other than my former company, the very place where Ha-Yun still worked as an executive assistant to the director. I saw familiar faces. They looked at me differently. No longer the devoted husband, but a promising partner, the young CEO. Still, I remained calm. I didn't boast. I didn't change how I treated people. I simply observed, waiting for the right moment. One afternoon I walked past her department during a site visit. She looked up and froze. I smiled, softly. The same smile she once loved, now a mirror to her discomfort. "What brings you here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Meeting with the technical director," I replied. "What are you doing now?" "Just a small startup, but enough to bring me here." She nodded. Her eyes flickered with something, maybe surprise, maybe regret. I turned to leave, but just before I stepped away, I asked, "Still have that necklace?" She went pale. Didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the building, leaving behind a silence colder than winter air. From that day on, she began messaging me. At first, polite questions. Then slowly, more personal confessions. "Are you doing okay? How have you been all this time?" "I miss the mornings we used to make coffee together." I didn't reply, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to be sure that I wouldn't break again. I had loved her with everything I had, but now I loved peace more. One evening, she called, for the first time in nearly half a year. "Can we meet just once?" she asked, her voice trembling. I paused, then replied, "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, the old cafe." She exhaled, softly, "Thank you." But what she didn't know was that I wasn't coming to listen. I was coming to close a chapter, and to begin one that belonged only to me. That night, I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe was just like it had always been. Warm space, soft amber lights, and the scent of pine wood mixed with espresso that clung to the air like old memories. It was the place we used to visit on anniversaries. The place where I first proposed, hiding a small ring and a cup of hot cocoa. I picked a table by the window where I could see anyone who walked in. And then she came. Same hair, same familiar frame, but the confidence was gone. She wore a long coat, gripping the strap of her purse like someone holding on to what little strength they had left. I stood up gently. She looked at me, her eyes hesitant. Then she nodded, a silent apology in her gaze. "Have you been waiting long?" she asked. I smiled. "I came early. We ordered drinks. Neither of us touched them. Neither of us knew where to begin." Eventually, she broke the silence. "I made a mistake. I said nothing. I didn't realize what I was losing until it was gone. You were always patient, always kind, and I betrayed that." I stayed quiet, looking into her eyes, not with anger, not with resentment, just waiting. He wasn't anything special. I didn't love him. It was just a moment of weakness, a mistake." I nodded slowly. "A mistake you hid in your drawer," I said, "and wrote a note for For every time I can't say it aloud. She lowered her head. I wanted to confess, I really did. But I was scared of losing you. I let out a small, tired laugh. And you thought lying would keep me? She stayed silent, then raised her eyes to mine, pleading, could you ever forgive me? That question had haunted me for months, perhaps hundreds of times, but every time I had pushed it away like dust on a mirror, because beneath that dust, betrayal was still written clear. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and placed a folder on the table. She frowned. What's this? Dissolution papers. Her eyes widened. It's for the company you've been hearing about lately. It's not small, and I'm the founder. I didn't build it to make money. I built it to reclaim everything I lost, not from you, but from myself. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. I spent too many years in your shadow, living as Hyun's husband. I forgot I had a name, a life, a future. Then I pulled out another envelope and laid it before her. This is proof of financial transactions between Jay and one of your former associates. I don't care about the details. Between you and him. But I need you to know I'm not the man who waits anymore. She opened the envelope, skimmed the documents, and her face turned pale. You were watching me? No. I was protecting myself. When someone loves deeply and is betrayed, they don't seek revenge. They seek the truth, she cried, not sobbing, but quietly, like a glass cracking in silence. I know I've lost the right to ask for anything, but if there's a way to make it up to you. I looked at her, and I realized I had truly changed. I wasn't angry, I wasn't heartbroken, I was simply calm, like someone who had walked through fire and learned to warm themselves from within. I didn't come here to punish you, I said gently. I came to say goodbye, the right way. She said nothing, just sat there, eyes red, hands trembling around a cup of coffee gone cold. I stood up. You were once the woman I loved most, but you're also the one who taught me how to rise from the deepest fall. I walked away, leaving behind a woman who had once meant everything, and now nothing more than a chapter I had finally finished reading, and inside me was peace I hadn't felt in years. After that meeting, I didn't contact Hyun again. No texts, no calls, but she kept trying. She sent emails, left messages through mutual friends, even mailed a handwritten letter to my office. Still, I stayed silent. I had once been the man who'd wait outside her office just to walk her home in the rain, but now I didn't want to offer any more pieces of myself to someone who had treated them like scraps. I remained composed, focused. I kept building the company day by day. Then came an opportunity. Her company, our old company, was preparing for its 25th anniversary celebration. I was invited as a strategic sponsor, since my company had just signed a long-term tech service contract with them 2 weeks prior. I knew she'd be there. And I knew Jay, the man who'd stepped into my marriage, would likely attend too. But I wasn't going there to confront them. I was going to stand tall under the lights and let my presence speak for itself. That's what real power is. It doesn't shout. It simply exists. That night, I wore a simple black suit. Nothing flashy. I arrived right on time, shook hands, exchanged polite smiles, maintained my quiet grace, and then I saw her. Hyun stood by the wine bar, wearing a light blue dress. Beautiful, but no longer the woman who had once made my heart race. She looked up the moment I walked in, panic and longing tangled in her eyes. I nodded gently, like greeting an old acquaintance. Nothing more. Then I saw him, Jay, tall, confident, his usual arrogant smile. But his expression shifted when he saw me shake hands with the CEO. When he heard the CEO say, "This young man is one of the most impressive partners we've ever worked with. The entire system is going to run on his design." I didn't look at Jay. I didn't need to. I could feel the unease creeping into his composure. Ha-Yoon approached, her voice carefully neutral. "You really came," I smiled. "It's a big event." "Why wouldn't I?" She seemed thrown off. "I'm glad to see you doing well," I nodded. "Thanks, I have you to thank for that." She stiffened. I lifted my glass and walked away, leaving her in that brightly lit room, beautiful but hollow. An hour later, While I was chatting with some directors, a staff member whispered something urgently to the manager. His face changed immediately and he rushed off. News spread quickly. A major glitch had just hit the company's internal system. Financial data had leaked. The old software was failing, and right in the middle of their biggest event, operations had to be paused. Stayed silent. No one knew. I had warned them about this exact vulnerability 3 weeks ago. They hadn't listened until it exploded in their hands. Only the CEO and I knew that my company's new system, already being implemented, would fix everything within 72 hours. I turned to him and smiled. Maybe it's time to speed up the integration. He gripped my hand firmly. I'm counting on you. Just then, Ha-Yun caught the moment, me shaking the hand of the man who used to be her boss. Her eyes dimmed. She no longer controlled anything in that room. Not the conversations, not the glances, not even the memory. All she had left was regret. As I was leaving, Jay caught up with me, his voice low. Hey, I didn't know you were... I cut him off. I don't need you to know, he paled. I didn't mean any harm. Whatever happened between me and her, it's over now. I looked at him directly. I don't care. But if you ever thought you won, you should understand something. Real winners never need to prove anything. Then I walked away without looking back. That night I returned to my new apartment. A space with no memories of her, no echoes of what we used to be. I poured myself a drink. And for the first time, in a very long time, I smiled without pretending. 3 weeks after that event, I received a strange email. The sender, Ha-Yun. The subject line read only 3 words. Please, one last time. I wasn't planning to reply, but a few hours later, she sent another message, short, but as heavy as stone. It's about your mother. I need to tell you something. My breath caught. My mother had passed away 5 years ago from a stroke. I was abroad on business then, didn't make it back in time. Ha-Yun had handled everything, arranged. The funeral with my father. She had cried by my mother's photo like it was her own loss. She always said she loved my mother like family. But now, that single sentence shattered everything I thought I knew. I agreed to meet. Not because I still cared, but because I needed to know just how deep the betrayal really went. We met at a small eatery on the city's edge, an old favorite from our early days. It was once our place. Now it was just another address. There were no memories left that could move me. Ha-Yun arrived 15 minutes late. No makeup, no designer coat, just a woman visibly thinner, with hollowed eyes and steps that carried the weight of regret. She sat across from me without looking up. Then, after a long pause, she began, I've kept something for too long. Something I should have told you 5 years ago. I nodded. Say it. She swallowed hard. The day your mother passed, she was still alive when the ambulance arrived. I narrowed my eyes. My heart started pounding. I got a call from the neighbor. They said she was lying on the floor. I got there before the ambulance. Her voice began to tremble. You got there first? And? I panicked. She looked at me, tried to say something, but couldn't. I froze. I didn't call for help right away. Instead, I called Jay. I felt my throat go dry. Jay. Why him? Because I was with him. I didn't want you to. No. Tears welled in her eyes. I was scared, and I delayed. Just for a few minutes, but those few minutes might have made the difference. I couldn't hear anything else. Only the sound of my own heart pounding like thunder in my ears. She wept, not loudly, but brokenly. I've never been able to forgive myself. I've lived with it every single day. I wanted to tell you so many times, but every time I looked at you, I couldn't find the courage. I stood up, not in anger, not to scream. I looked at her, the woman who had once meant everything, and said, You didn't kill her with a knife. You killed her with your cowardice. She collapsed over the table. Please, don't say that. I pulled out a copy of my mother's handwritten will. It was simple, but contained one line I had never paid enough attention to until now. If Ha-Yun hadn't come into his life, maybe my son wouldn't feel so alone. I slid it across the table. Maybe my mother saw something I didn't. Until now. I walked away, leaving her bent over the old wooden table, weeping as the people around her stared, not with judgment, just with the silence reserved for someone who had lost everything, most of all themselves. That evening I held a small remembrance for my mother on what would have been her birthday. I didn't invite Ha-Yun. Instead, I invited close friends, a few relatives, and my father, who had stayed silent all these years to avoid stepping between a son and his marriage. During the ceremony, I stood up and read a few words. Mom used to say, "Pain isn't what we should fear. It's forgetting who we are in the pain." Today, standing here, I finally remember who I am. People clapped gently, but I didn't need their applause. I only wanted her, my mother, to hear it, wherever she was, because for the first time, I had truly let go. After the memorial for my mother, I drove alone to a mountain cabin on the outskirts of the city, a place I once dreamed of building with Ha-Eun, but never did. Now, it was mine, not our dream, just mine. A space not to escape love, but to rediscover myself. I visited it every weekend. No social media, no phone calls, just books, an old guitar, and the wind threading through the pine trees. Each morning I brewed a cup of coffee and wrote in a journal. I wrote about little things, a squirrel darting past the window, the smell of rain-soaked earth, and the reflection of my own smile in the mirror. I realized happiness didn't come from having someone. It came from no longer needing anyone to feel whole. One afternoon I received a letter. It was from Ha-Yun. No excuses, no pleas, just a few handwritten lines. "Thank you for once loving me with everything you had. I don't expect your forgiveness. I only hope you live well. It took me too long to realize. The man who once stood by my side was the greatest thing I ever lost." I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away, but I never read it again, because I didn't need answers anymore. I no longer needed her to feel sorry, or the world to know who was right or wrong. I just needed to be me, a man who had once been broken, once fallen, but now still standing. For a year, I didn't fall in love again. I learned how to live alone, not in loneliness, but in peace. I traveled. I learned photography. I volunteered to teach writing to underprivileged kids every weekend, and every time I looked into their bright, curious eyes, I remembered life was still beautiful if I allowed it to be. One autumn afternoon, I met a woman in a library. She was reading by the window, her face serene, and her eyes carried something familiar, not sorrow but resilience. We didn't fall in love quickly. We became friends, and slowly those nameless conversations became the part of the day I most looked forward to, and I thought, maybe this time I'll love slowly, not because I fear getting hurt, but because I want to love with peace, not out of a need to fill a void. One evening, as the sunset cast golden light across my cabin, I finished writing the final chapter of a book I'd been working on, a novel inspired by my own life. I titled it, "The Man Who Waited in the Rain," not because I was still waiting for someone to return, but because I had waited long enough, in silence, in pain, in stillness, and in the end, the person I found wasn't her. It was me.